the earlier attacks on the policemen, the killing of the policemen, those issues are just not being taken up. Now, the indemnity clause, for example, you know that under the Yunus regime, they gave themselves indemnity. Now it seems that Prime Minister Tariq Raman is going to accept that indemnity. But tell me, how can you talk about indemnity? So indemnity for all the killings.
Once again, indemnity is an illegal thing as per Bangladeshi court.
Now, so if you have a partial response, that means you're going to say that we are going to look at the Awami League as a terrorist organization, but we're not going to look at the killing of the policemen. You know, the poor policemen and their families, they've been like made invisible under the Prime Minister Tariq Rahman. How the problems are still continuing. Look at the media people who are in jail. None of them have been released. Anis Alimgir,
Right.
one person has been, I think, released, but none of the others have been released.
None of the others have been released. A fresh anti-terror case has been slapped on one of the journalists.
That at the end of 2025, on 29 December 2025 to be exact, just about 3 months ago, there was a letter written to the Yunus administration by 3 very important agencies of the United Nations. And these 3 agencies of the United Nations, these included, the letter was signed by Ben Saul, who is a UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights while countering terrorism, by Matthew Gillett, who is the Vice Chair on Communications of the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, and Margaret Thatcherthwaite, who is a UN Special Rapporteur on the independence of judges and lawyers. So these 3 leaders of the UN and their various organizations have written to had written earlier to the Yunus administration, saying that the reported measures which were imposed by the Yunus regime are concluded to be unnecessary and disproportionate restrictions on the freedom of association, peaceful assembly, expression, participation in public affairs, and the right to a fair trial under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, where Bangladesh is a signatory, and they have violated their commitments under those rights. Now, of course, in the last 3 months, the Yunus regime gave no answer till the elections on 12th of February, of course, which was 6 weeks after the letter was sent. No answer at all. But the Prime Minister Tariq Rahman's government has equally kept completely silent on this. And they have not answered at all. Now, these are communications from very senior and respected UN agencies, and they are directly questioning the decision on banning the Awami League. Why was it done? What were the specific current and concrete risks on the basis of which the Awami League was banned in May 2025? And in fact, even the decision to try Sheikh Hasina under the ICT, that's another ordinance that is to be decided.
Right. Hi, welcome to Podcast with Pratim. I have with me Ambassador Veena Sikri. She was ambassador in Dhaka. Welcome to the show, madam.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show.
So naturally, when Madam Sikri is here, so we are going to discuss Bangladesh. Madam, the Tariq Raman government of BNP is in power for last 1.5 months. India backed BNP. How do you see the new government performing? Do they match our expectations so far?
Well, I think I must say that when the BNP won the elections, which were held on 12th of February, as you said, roughly about close to 2 months, actually, 12th of April will be 2 months. And when the BNP won 2/3 majority, there was a huge sigh of relief, I would say, because up until that point, it had been fully speculated that it's the Jamaat-e-Islami that's going to come to power, and that Jamaat-e-Islami is going to form the government for the first time ever in the 55-year-old history of independent Bangladesh. And based on the experience of the last 18 months, since July, August 2024, when Yunus was appointed the interim regime chief, and the force behind Yunus was the Jamaat-e-Islami. So for the 18 months, the Jamaat-e-Islami has been the power behind the throne in Bangladesh. And we've seen that in these 18 months, the 4 or 5 major trends were, first of all, rapid increase in Islamization, because you saw quite unprecedented, because if it's an interim regime, although the regime was sworn in on a constitution which had no provision for an interim regime, but still, if you believe that the caretaker government is supposed to be there for 90 days and to just arrange elections and maintain law and order, this interim regime did none of this. So in the interim regime itself, which is supposed to be an apolitical regime with just technocrats who are going to advise the chief advisor on how to maintain law and order and how to conduct the elections, for which, of course, the election commission is responsible. So none of this happened, but you had the Islami Andolan Bangladesh, the Hizb ut-Tahrir, all Islamist organizations appointed as part of the interim regime. They were made advisors. So they had a direct role in governance. And you saw on the streets a rapid increase in Islamism. You saw people who were jailed by the Sheikh Hasina government for terrorist activities. They were released. They were forcibly released. Like, you know, the mob surrounding the jail and forcing them to be released. And you saw the system of mobocracy. That's the only word to use, the system that was in place, where the mobs would come and surround, like they surrounded all the judges of the Supreme Court and the High Court, forcing them to resign. And after that, the Jamaat-e-Islami appointed their own people. They would surround professors whom they didn't like. They would surround vice chancellors, gherao them, as we say in Indian political parlance, and force them to resign. So all these changes, quite against the norms of an interim regime, were brought about. And we saw towards the end, in the lead up to the elections, that the Americans also announced their support for the Jamaat-e-Islami. And that made everybody absolutely, apprehensive that the Jamaat-e-Islami is going to come to power and there's going to be a total new system in place, because the Jamaat-e-Islami, being the force behind Muhammad Yunus, did not want elections to be held for at least another 4 years. They said, we want to have reforms, we want to change, many things in Bangladesh, and only then we will have. So they appointed a commission for police reforms, election reforms, constitution reforms, and all the works. Now, this is against the constitution, but nobody could say anything. And there was an American professor, Ali Riaz, of Bangladesh origin, who was made head of the Constitutional Reform Commission. And a whole new July National Charter was created. The other thing was that the Yunus regime for 18 months ruled through ordinances. 133 ordinances were passed during the Yunus regime. It is true that under Article 93 of the Constitution of Bangladesh, this does allow the president of Bangladesh to promulgate ordinances when the parliament is not in session, and when circumstances exist which render immediate action necessary. Now, this is, of course, when you talk about immediate action, it can have something to do with law and order, but it does not deal with changes in the constitution. And also, the scope of such ordinances is severely limited, and no such ordinance can amend the constitution. And these ordinances can only deal with the issues which are in the constitution, which the constitution allows. So an ordinance is being passed as a temporary measure, and the newly elected parliament is scheduled to ratify all these ordinances. If they don't ratify the ordinances within 30 days, the ordinances lapse. So this was a situation we had on the eve of the election. And these 133 ordinances were there. These included ordinances on the constitutional reform, on the July National Charter, on the referendum. A referendum was held simultaneously with the election on 12th February on whether the constitution, the July National Charter was accepted or not. And it was envisaged in the Constitutional Reform Commission itself that there would be, that the newly elected parliament would also become a constitutional reform commission and would look at the July National Charter and approve of the provisions which had been laid out therein. So all this was being anticipated, that if Jamaat-e-Islami comes to power, there was so much apprehension, the whole constitution will be changed, the system of governance will be changed. The Jamaat-e-Islami had been talking openly about Sharia law. Having seen all this, when Prime Minister Tariq Raman got the two-thirds majority, it was like a breath of fresh air. It was like a storm of fresh air, because two or three things happened. First of all, Prime Minister Tariq Raman was very sober in his initial response. He did not even allow celebration. He said, no, we're not going to have celebrations. We're going to get down to work. Now, in the context of what had happened previously when there were celebrations, like, for example, in the 2001 parliamentary election when BNP came to power, these celebrations became attacks on the opposition, attacks on the minority. Anybody who didn't vote for them, it became a huge issue, like it continued non-stop for 3 months. And Tariq Rahman statement that there'll be no celebrations.
If I'm not wrong, that was the period you were there, right?
Yes, as I was there, yes, from 2003 to 2006. So when Tariq Rahman said that, there will be no celebration, huge sigh of relief. Then what happened was that when the time came to take the oath as a member of parliament for all those who had been elected, suddenly we saw that there was a second oath being proposed. Nobody quite knows where the second oath came from, whether the election commission drew it up, whether the parliament secretariat drew it up. But anyway, there was a second oath saying you're simultaneously going to take oath as member of the Constitutional Reform Council. Now, here again, Prime Minister Tariq Rahman took a very sober and realistic position. He said no. He said, we are not going to take the second oath because this oath is for changing the constitution. So if you have one oath, which is saying that you're a member of parliament and your duty is to protect, preserve and defend the constitution. That's what your oath as MP says. But the second oath says that you're going to look at this July National Charter. So in fact, the Home Minister, Salahuddin Ahmed, in the presence of Tariq Rahman, said this second oath is unconstitutional. This was also another breath of fresh air, that here was, Prime Minister Tariq Rahman saying that he's going to follow the constitution, he's going to be very constitutional about it, and he's not going to take the second oath. So all the two-thirds BNP members, two-thirds members of parliament who were BNP, they did not take the oath. And their alliance partners, of course, did not take the oath. But the Jamaat-e-Islami, who had, of course, got a sizable, they were the major opposition, they had about 77 seats, 68 for Jamaat-e-Islami plus others for the NCP, which is also in alliance with the NCP is the Students' Party, which was formed after the July, August 2024 events, which ousted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. So they did not take the oath. Now, the question is, when this happened and the Prime Minister Tariq Rahman called the second oath is unconstitutional, there was a great buzz in Bangladesh among all the lawyers, among all the constitutional experts there and abroad, that once you call something unconstitutional, then the person who has done the unconstitutional act is liable to lose his parliament seat. And here, you have this great statement by the Home Minister himself. So there was a great buzz that, no, now these Jamaat-e-Islami people are going to lose their seats, including the NCP, and there'll have to be fresh elections and so on. And in addition to all of this, there was this great expectation that the Awami League the ban on the activities of the Awami League would now be lifted. So this was another important expectation, because even in the few days after the results were declared, the Awami League, many Awami League offices all across Bangladesh started opening up. When the ban on Awami League activities was imposed in May 2025, then all the offices in the length and breadth of the country were closed down, locks were put on them. Now, one by one, the locks were broken, and sometimes in the presence of BNP people, the Awami League members, local members.
If I could interject you here, is that I fully understand what you're saying, and we are aware of, yes, Awami League initially thought that they can go back to their offices. They opened the offices and soon they were arrested and the offices are closed.
Some of them, yes. Now, in some areas where the Jamaat-e-Islami was very active, and maybe in areas where they had also won, they protested. There were, in other areas, the offices were closed and were opened, and the Awami League was singing national songs. They were saying Joy Bangla, Joy Bangabandhu, nothing happened.
But that is over. That phase is over.
Now the question is, so that, as I'm saying, that led to a great expectation that this would now, the ban on the Awami League would be lifted. And this was, in fact, a great scene of renaissance, of coming back of democracy to Bangladesh. But over the next 4 weeks, what has happened is that when Parliament assembled on the 17th of February, then it became clear that Prime Minister Tariq Raman had no such plans, and he formed a committee to look at all these 133 ordinances. And there is now discussion going on. I think they have a deadline of 12th April or 17th April, by which they have to decide which are going to be. So the focus now is on three ordinances. The focus now is just on three ordinances. And these are, number one, the ordinance about the referendum. Now, there is no provision in the Constitution of Bangladesh for a referendum. The present Constitution has no provision. So,
Number
obviously,
one. Number two, there was a court verdict that declared it illegal.
yes,
And also there is a Bangladeshi constitution is a very nice piece of work. So two researchers, one from LSE, other one is from Wharton School, they pointed out that the provisions that you are bringing in is, you cannot change that as per the constitution. It's
exactly. That's very important. I think what you said is absolutely crucial. And so the referendum has to be declared unconstitutional, and as such, ipso facto, it doesn't exist. Now, if the referendum doesn't exist, then how can you have the July National Charter coming before the Parliament? Because then there is no approval. As it is, you know that even in the counting of the referendum votes, there was a huge amount of controversy where 1 million extra votes were there, more than those who had voted in the elections. And, the referendum papers were printed by the government, not by the Election
I
Commission.
think it is a complete waste of time to discuss about the Yunus administration and their legalities. I mean, there was nothing legal about it.
Absolutely
And
right.
they didn't care about it.
Yes, but the reason for my discussion is to point out how the expectation was building up that this would be this illegality that you mentioned with the strong supporting factors would be accepted by Prime Minister Tariq Rahman. That is the critical part.
Right.
Now, that did not happen. Now, that is where the disappointment comes in. Similarly, now, if you reject the referendum, which you said, now then you come to July National Charter. So which of these clauses of the July National Charter are you going to accept, which are going to be rejected? But this has to be discussed clause by clause or as a proposal of the new parliament. It cannot be just bundled together and said, yes or no, which is what the referendum tried to do. So then you come down to the specific aspects of the clause of the National Charter. Now, there is no indication of this at all by Prime Minister Tariq Rahman's government. There is absolutely no indication. For example, he did say specifically in his first press conference, there will be no mobocracy, we will follow the constitution, everybody is an equal citizen of Bangladesh, regardless of race, ethnicity, or religion. All these promises were made. And yes, I can say absolutely that the attacks on the minorities have sharply reduced, if not stopped. The attacks on the minority sharply reduced. But none of the other aspects, the mobocracy is still continuing. There is no law and order. Still, the policemen of the earlier, the earlier attacks on the policemen, the killing of the policemen, those issues are just not being taken up. Now, the indemnity clause, for example, you know that under the Yunus regime, they gave themselves indemnity. Now, it seems that Prime Minister Tariq Rahman is going to accept that indemnity. But tell me, how can you talk about indemnity? So indemnity for all the killings.
Once again, indemnity is a illegal thing as per Bangladeshi court.
Yes, absolutely right. It is not even there in the constitution. It has been rejected. It was done once before, after Bangabandhu was assassinated. But after that,
I think the indemnity they gave when you were there to what was that operation in 2002? So they gave indemnity to those army officers, and later on it was struck down.
Yes, exactly. That indemnity is not there. Absolutely right. And so that is why, again, indemnity, how can you consider it? Now, so if you have a partial response, that means you're going to say that we are going to look at the Awami League as a terrorist organization, but we're not going to look at the killing of the policemen. All those, the poor policemen and their families, they've been like made invisible. And there's actually no clause. Now, that was another factor. So I think, thirdly, I would like to draw attention to another important issue that has come up. In the last few days, we've seen, first of all, the Bangladesh Human Rights Watch in New York. They have brought out a whole listing of what has been happening with under the Prime Minister Tariq Rahman, how the problems are still continuing. Look at the media people who are in jail. None of them have been released. Anis Alamgir, one person, has been, I think, released, but none of the others have been released.
None of the others have been released. A fresh anti-terror case has been slapped on one of the journalists,
Yes, yes,
and I mean, something which is not even illegal, like someone played that 7th March lecture
yes,
of
yes, yes.
Bangabandhu,
The speech of Bangabandhu on 7th of March
and
1971.
there was nothing illegal about it.
Exactly,
But
exactly.
they arrested her and etc. So it's the what actually I had Mr. Sabir Mustafa, former editor of BBC Bangla here, and what he said is that the Tariq Raman government is following the same policies of the Yunus administration.
Exactly. That is a very correct conclusion, and that is a disappointing conclusion. And that is a very disappointing conclusion because the breath of fresh air that I spoke about has absolutely dissipated. And I think we must also draw attention to a fact that, which actually people have just totally forgotten about, that at the end of 2025, on 29 December 2025 to be exact, just about 3 months ago, there was a letter written to the Yunus administration by three very important agencies of the United Nations. And these three agencies of the United Nations, these included, the letter was signed by Ben Saul, who is a UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights while countering terrorism, by Matthew Gillett, who is the Vice Chair on Communications of the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, and Margaret Thathathwaite, who is a UN Special Rapporteur on the independence of judges and lawyers. So these three leaders of the UN and their various organizations have written to the had written earlier to the Yunus administration, saying that the reported measures which were imposed by the Yunus regime are concluded to be unnecessary and disproportionate restrictions on the freedom of association, peaceful assembly, expression, participation in public affairs, and the right to a fair trial under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, where Bangladesh is a signatory and they have violated their commitments under those rights. Now, of course, in the last 3 months, the Yunus regime gave no answer till the elections on 12th of February, of course, which was 6 weeks after the letter was sent. No answer at all. But the Prime Minister Tariq Rahman's government has equally kept completely silent on this. And they have not answered at all. Now, these are communications from very senior and respected UN agencies, and they are directly questioning the decision on banning the Awami League. Why was it done? What were the specific current and concrete risks on the basis of which the Awami League was banned in May 2025? And in fact, even the decision to try Sheikh Hasina under the ICT, that's another ordinance that is to be decided.
Right. It was a clear case of jurisdiction issue. An
Yes,
ICT
exactly.
formed for certain purposes and you just using it for another purpose.
Exactly. So that is the whole point. Now, and then there's no fair trial because the right to defense was not given. It was very peremptory, the trial, and the death sentence was absolutely, nothing was proved to show that there was a death sentence. And so all these issues have been actually raised in this question. The whole issue of arrest and detention and fair trial concerns for all the people in jail, including people like Chinmoy Das, including Awami Leaguers. And we know that some Awami
Right.
Leaguers
Chinmoy Das is not released.
is not released at all, and no reason given for the lack of bail, for the lack of trial. For no reason have been given for the detention for such a long time.
All fictitious cases. The way it all happened, we know. It's all fictitious.
Exactly. And among the Awami Leaguers who are in jail, thousands and thousands of them, one person was released IV, as we know, and then she was shown reason.